has been here for the first time tonight? Anybody? Wow, okay. Well then, a quick note about who we are and what we do. So I represent Sustaining Capital. My partner Carl, the guy with the pizza, founded this particular meetup 4 years ago now. And initially there were 12 people that showed up, and now we typically have, last year we had up to 300 people show up at some events and typically around 80 people. We're trying to make it as useful as possible. So whatever I'm presenting to you today is not necessarily in the context of our venture firm, but it's more meant in the spirit of peer review. So I'm presenting you an opinion. If you have a contrary view, please let me know, right? We're using the scientific method to investing, and we also conduct these events in that same spirit, right? Because this is a new topic, right? There's a lot of new things that are coming together, and it's not well understood. And unfortunately, what we experience every day is there's a lot of marketing copy that gets out there, and people understand this to be as blockchain, and it has really nothing to do with what we understand blockchain to be about. And a lot of these topics include the topic of money and currency as the low-hanging fruit of blockchain-based applications, because blockchain really in the near term is all about the things that are already digital. And most of money is digital already, has been digital for quite some time. And unfortunately, what's happening specifically in MBA classes and in the economy at large, you get indoctrinated into these old type of definitions of what money is. So oftentimes you'll see this list. This list will say money has to fulfill the criteria of a medium of exchange, unit of account, standard of value, and a store of value. And this dude here is actually the guy who came up with that particular criteria in 1875. 1875 was also the year that Alexander Graham Bell filed his patent for the phone. So if you use the same paradigm, then a phone has to have a cable, has to be plugged into a wall, and has to have some form of black microphone attached to that, right? So keep that in mind when I walk through this, and I'll offer you a couple of other definitions of what I understand money and currency to be. And why do I use these both terms? Because oftentimes you'll find this, even in modern literature, used synonymous. In my mind, money and currency are really very different things. Sound money. What's sound money? This guy here is Aristotle. He actually defined sound money much earlier, obviously, than Jevons, the guy earlier, as something that's doable, transferable, divisible, and lastly, has intrinsic value. And I only threw this in because whenever you are at a Bitcoin presentation, you will see this particular picture. And not once did someone explain this correctly, unfortunately, because these are stones on the island of Yap. And to me, it's actually more a confirmation of proof of work, because the reason why these things were valuable, because it took a lot of effort and was very dangerous to bring them to the island. A lot of people died in the process of trying to bring them to the island. And what happened later, there was some foreign entity invading that particular island, and they found out that there's an easier process of doing this with larger boats and so forth, and the currency obviously devalued. But that's not the important part. The important part is how these were transferred, because obviously that's not in the picture, and you really wouldn't want to hand those over. So the way these were transferred is that people got together in the village, they stood in a big circle, and someone said, "Hey, I'm James, I'm going to transfer this to Gina." Everybody got that? Okay, good. Like public declaration. Sounds familiar? These things are even older, 3000 BC. So these are the first ledgers. So ledgers are very old instruments. Anybody familiar with Western Union? No one? Very good. Anyway, Western Union initially was a telegraph company. They connected the West and the East Coast, and was also the first company to send virtual money in 1871, and they still do. So you would go into a telegraph station, you would hand over cash to the guy operating this machine, and he would telegraph someone on the other side of the continent to send this particular money. Wrong direction. So this is what most people understand to be money today. This is not money at all. So if you read closely, this is a Federal Reserve note, which is really a debt instrument. It has nothing to do with money or currency in any shape or form. And this is the sad part about this. So every year we print billions of dollars at billions of dollars of hundreds of millions of dollars of cost of this paper money. A $10 bill lasts about 4.5 years. A $100 bill lasts about 15 years. But then obviously we're still making quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies we actually make at greater cost than what its face value is right now. But we're still doing it. When was the last time someone paid with a penny, nickel, dime, quarter? Okay, rest my case. And then what happens after you spend it, keep going the wrong direction, you'll see these armored trucks running around, collecting all of those and recircling them. Right? I'm not quite sure why we're still doing this, but this is all part of the cost of money today. I think that's often being ignored, specifically when you see articles that complain about the cost of proof of work and the cost of actually transferring Bitcoin. A lot of time what's being ignored there is specifically, there's a lot more people involved than just those people that sit in these particular wagons, right? There's 25,000 people that work at JP Morgan Chase. There's 20,000 people that work for Visa and so forth. How many employees does Bitcoin have? 0. Yes, everybody who's participating in that system does so voluntarily by simply downloading the code and running a mining machine if they choose to. And they wouldn't be doing it if they're losing money, right? So the scenario you saw earlier, no one would be minting a penny if they had to spend a penny and a half to mint that penny. This couldn't happen. This only can happen because we let the government, quote unquote, do this. So what's the trajectory of this dollar, right? So this is when the dollar was $1. This is the dollar today. It's about 3% left of value. If you had a quarter that was minted in 1965, it would have bought you a gallon of gas in 1965. Today, that same quarter would still buy you a gallon of gas because the amount of silver is still worth enough to buy you a gallon of gas. So that's why you always hear these semantically wrongly worded statements as in, well, gold price went up, gold price fell. No. Gold was an ounce of gold yesterday. It's going to be an ounce of gold tomorrow. It's going to be an ounce of gold in the United States. It's going to be an ounce of gold in Japan. Right? So this is always worded wrongly. And I would like for all of you to pay attention to these semantic tricks. So all fiat eventually failed. There were more than 150 fiat experiments, and eventually they all failed. The oldest fiat currency still alive is the British pound sterling. But also the British pound sterling has about 0.5% of its original value still in it. And it's reasonably to assume that it will eventually fail. The average lifetime of fiat was less than 25 years. So I've shown this particular slide in various ways. Today, what we have is mostly the transfer of digital money. So the medium of exchange from slide 1 is digital. So a lot of times you'll see these articles that say, hey, we now got digital currencies. No, we had digital currencies for a very long time. 92% of all money is digital. Trillions of dollars and trillions of other currencies are digital, have been for a very long time. And the other part about this is, so this is one ledger at Chase. There's another ledger at Bank of America. So whenever you hear these words of distributed ledgers, that's your distributed ledger system. So what blockchain actually does, it disrupts distributed ledger systems. So don't fall for the language that's being put out by Bank of America filing blockchain patents. There is no such thing as a blockchain patent. It's the opposite of a patent. Right? Blockchain has to be open source, censorship resistant, and cannot be patented. It's like saying, I patented the internet, like you're not saying anything. Credit cards. The first credit cards were actually introduced by airlines, American Airlines specifically, and by the end of 1940, all US carriers had adopted that particular system. So they were actually the first one to introduce credit cards. The next one was Diners Club in 1950, and then American Express. And what we know as Visa, and that's not a typo, was actually initially introduced as Bank AmeriCard, and later was licensed by Bank of America, obviously, as Visa. Cryptocurrencies. Bad topic. I keep saying, and have been saying for a long time, the number of cryptocurrencies we need is anywhere between 0 and 1. I'll expand on that. Also, a lot of these quote-unquote cryptocurrencies never had the intention of being currencies. What's a currency? A currency is a system of money. A lot of these, specifically Ethereum, Ether, had no intention of being a system of money. Ether fulfills a number of properties on the Ethereum network, and most of them are not the exchange of money. It's network protection, mostly, in my opinion, as in it's a supercomputer, the unstoppable computer, you probably have heard that. It needs to be protected, as in not to be DDoSed. It needs to cost something so that people can use it for free and clog it up. But a lot of these other things outside of maybe Zcash, maybe Monero, maybe Bitcoin Cash, really had no intention of functioning as currency. So hence, this name is pretty bad. Also, cryptocurrencies are nothing new. DigiCash was created, I think, in 1993, was actually the first cryptocurrency. So what's really new is this particular thing, the digital bearer instrument. Your dollar notes, the thing that I showed you earlier, they are physically bearer instruments. What's a bearer instrument? A bearer instrument is something that I can give you, and it settles the transaction. Right? It's unlike your credit card or any other decentralized ledger system where I have to wait for something to settle. In the case of a credit card or a wire transfer, 24 hours, maybe 2 weeks, whatever the number is. So with a bearer instrument, once I give you my $100 note for whatever item I'm buying from you, it settles the transaction. That's the beauty about a bearer instrument. So, and that's the main innovation I want you to remember that the Bitcoin white paper introduced. It showed you a method to create digital bearer instruments for the first time. How does that work? Well, in order for something to be a bearer instrument, I need to be able to hand it over, and I don't have an immediate possibility to take it back. And oftentimes in the blockchain concept, that's referred to as immutable. There's nothing truly immutable, to be honest. Anything can technically be reversed, but it's practically immutable. What does that mean? It's not by the virtue of cryptography, necessarily. It's not by the virtue of all those different nodes. It's mainly the virtue that it would be utterly in no one's interest to aggregate the hash power, the mining power, to reverse this transaction, because what this would do, it would erode all the trust in the system and actually defunct the value that it was trying to obtain. So that's what's creating the immutability, the decentralization of the incentive system. So I've been trying to make this a thing. I would propose that money is actually simply a language. If you look at your wallet, what you'll probably see is the sign, right? You'll probably see your US dollar. If you're in another country, let's say you're in Europe, you might see a euro sign. You're in Japan, you might see yen, and so forth. So what does it tell you? Money is actually language. I mean, all of these are just zeros and ones in some ledger, in some database, some entry. But for you to understand, for you to have a reference, you have been indoctrinated into a certain language of trade. And probably for most people here in the room, that language of trade is the US dollar. And if you ever see anything else, what do you need? You need a translation into your language, otherwise you don't have a reference. And that's why if you hold any of those cryptocurrencies, if you pull up your digital wallet right now, you will see the translation in the language you understand. Hence, I would suggest money is actually language. What's currency? Currencies solve the cow problem. The cow problem is the coincidence of one's problem. The coincidence that barter doesn't solve, where I have a cow and I want a beer, and it's really hard to trade this way. So that's why I introduced a new medium of exchange. And the medium of exchange could be coins, could be cigarette butts, if you're in a penitentiary, still today. Could be anything that we agree upon. Because that part is always a meta agreement. I accept whatever you understand as currency and I understand as currency. We accept this particular medium of exchange. And it's situational. If you're in London, you'll probably use British pound sterling if you pay with any kind of printed bearer instrument. If you're in the United States, you use a dollar and so forth. But you could still use something else as long as the other party will accept it as that medium of exchange. Again, it solves the coincidence of one's problem. That's all there is. This is what we need. What do I mean by that? You probably remember rotary phones. Actually, most people in the room probably don't remember rotary phones. We're tethered to the wall, and when you called overseas, you had to talk really fast, and sometimes even if you called another state, you would talk really fast because those phone companies would charge you by the minute, right? And you call Germany, it would be $15 a minute and something crazy. And eventually, there was this protocol that came along called Voice over IP or SIP. And there was a software called Skype, and you could just install that, and all of a sudden, you could call mom in Europe for free. That's the reason why everybody in the room today probably has a smartphone that you pay $60 or something in that neighborhood for on a monthly basis flat, and you call mom all day long without giving it a second thought. When we introduced SIP, money, voice over IP, we should have introduced money over IP. Now we have all the tools to build money over IP. Unfortunately, every day we still see articles, every day. I've been paying attention to this for 100 days in a row now, that says, well, we create new cryptocurrency adoption. Now Starbucks accepts Bitcoin. Now the dry cleaning down the street accepts Ether. It's like, that's the other way around. People do not adapt to technology. If you're developing technology, you adapt your technology to people. So if and when we have money over IP, if you can approach a terminal at the checkout stand at a Starbucks, and that terminal doesn't have to know whether or not you subscribe to your language of trade being US dollar, British pound sterling, it will just know your frame of reference and what it wants and adapts to the merchant. Then you know we'll have money over IP. We're that close. We have a lot of resistance, but this is the next and the final step. So at that point in time, you'll hopefully have flat rates for all your banking services or no fees at all. That's the end of my little speech.